A pregnant wife discovers her millionaire husband's betrayal, and instead of begging for love, she hires a ruthless lawyer. What follows is a jaw-dropping battle of secrets, lies, and power, leading to a public showdown that shocks an entire empire. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's a story of a woman who chose strength over silence. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, unforgettable stories like this one. Rick Calloway was the kind of man people envied from afar. At just 39, he had inherited his family's shipping empire, Calloway Maritime, a name synonymous with prestige along the eastern seaboard. Born into generational wealth, Rick was raised in opulent mansions where butlers greeted guests and summer vacations met private islands, not beach motels. He walked into boardrooms as comfortably as he did into black-tie galas, always wearing the same easy smile that charmed CEOs and senators alike. On paper, he had it all: money, power, and a picture-perfect marriage to a woman the press dubbed America's sweetheart. Marie Calloway, 35, didn't grow up with privilege. She was the daughter of a nurse who worked double shifts and a father who vanished before she could even remember his face. Raised in a small Ohio town where people waved from front porches and borrowed sugar from neighbors, Marie learned early on to fight quietly, for respect, for dignity, for every opportunity she earned. After earning her degree in psychology, she'd worked with at-risk youth in underfunded shelters, the kind of places Rick had only ever driven past. And yet, despite their differences, they met, fell in love, and stunned high society by making it work. Rick claimed she grounded him. Marie said he made her feel safe. Their love story played out in glossy magazine spreads and charity event photo ops. Rick in custom-tailored tuxedos, Marie in elegant but modest dresses, her hand always resting gently on his chest. 2 years into their marriage, they announced they were expecting. The public swooned. It was the perfect narrative: the hard-working humanitarian and the corporate heir building a modern-day fairy tale. But behind the arched gates of their sprawling Connecticut estate, all was not as it seemed. At first, the cracks were almost invisible. Rick still brought Marie her favorite peppermint tea every morning. He still kissed her forehead before slipping out the door. But she noticed how distracted he'd become, how often he stared blankly at his phone, how his eyes darted to the floor when she asked about his day. Meetings, he would say, his tone clipped and impersonal. Just more of the same. Marie tried not to overthink it. Pregnancy came with its own emotional roller coaster, and she told herself she was being sensitive. Still, when Rick began coming home later and later, always with a vague excuse and a distracted kiss on the cheek, her unease grew roots. One night, while tossing and turning in their California king bed, Marie padded down to the kitchen for warm milk. As she passed Rick's study, she noticed the soft glow of a screen. He was hunched over his laptop, face tense, tapping away furiously. She stepped in, startled him, and he quickly slammed the laptop shut. "Working on a proposal," he said with a tight smile. "At midnight?" she asked gently. "Time zones," he muttered. "Europe." The next morning, a text appeared on Rick's phone. Marie hadn't meant to look, but it buzzed while he was in the shower. The screen flashed with a message that made her blood run cold. "We need to talk tonight, you promised." The sender's name was only listed as D. Marie stood frozen, staring at the screen. Her heart pounded in her ears. She didn't say anything right away. Instead, she waited, watched, collected small pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized she was trying to solve. When Rick claimed he had to fly to Chicago for a surprise investor meeting, she noticed his overnight bag already packed. When he came home with a new tie she hadn't seen before, she smelled perfume on the collar, subtle, expensive, and definitely not hers. Still, Marie clung to the belief that maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was paranoid. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and emotionally frayed. It was possible, wasn't it, that Rick was just stressed? That the man she had shared vows with, who had whispered baby names into her ear just weeks ago, wasn't hiding something behind every late night and every deflected question? But doubt, once planted, doesn't wither easily. It grows in silence. It feeds on unanswered questions and tight-lipped smiles. Then came the call. It was a gray Tuesday morning. Rain tapped against the windows, and Marie was folding tiny onesies in the nursery when Rick's phone buzzed again. He was out for a meeting, and without thinking, Marie picked up. "Hello?" she answered. A woman's voice, sharp, breathy, almost panicked, spoke on the other end. Rick. Marie's voice caught. No, this is his wife." The line went dead. She stared at the phone, her breath shallow. There was no explanation this time. No way to rationalize what she'd just heard. The truth wasn't just knocking. It had kicked the door down. And Marie Calloway, once the girl who believed in fairy tales, realized hers might be coming to a brutal, unraveling end. Marie tried to breathe through the storm inside her chest, but something had shifted. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now echoed with questions she was too afraid to ask. She couldn't shake the woman's voice from her head, the breathy stammer. "Rick, is that you?" And the chill that followed when the line went dead. For days, Marie said nothing. She smiled through dinner, folded baby clothes, and pretended to sleep beside a husband she could no longer recognize. She needed to know the truth. And not the half-truths Rick had been feeding her with soft tones and "it's just business" deflections. She needed something real, something solid. So one afternoon, while Rick was away at a client summit in Boston, she called Karen Jensen. Karen had been Marie's friend since grad school. Now in her early 60s, she was sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal, and had a sixth sense for trouble, especially when it involved men in expensive suits and slippery morals. They met at a quiet cafe in the village square, the kind of place with wooden booths and slow jazz humming beneath the clatter of teacups. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," Karen said as soon as she saw her. "I haven't," Marie admitted, stirring her herbal tea without sipping. "Karen, I think Rick's cheating on me." Karen didn't react with shock. She simply leaned forward, hands clasped. "Tell me everything." Marie laid it all out. The late nights, the evasive answers, the perfume, the text from Dee, and the phone call. When she was done, Karen exhaled through her nose, steady and deliberate. "You need proof," she said, "and I know someone who can get it." That's how Tom Barlow came into the picture. A retired detective in his early 60s, Tom had the quiet demeanor of a man who'd seen too much to be impressed by anything. He met Marie at the back of a small bookstore, where the smell of old pages helped calm her nerves. "I don't take every case," Tom said, flipping through a notepad. "But Karen said you were someone worth helping." Marie explained her situation, voice trembling at times. She didn't want a scandal. She didn't want revenge. She just needed to know, for herself, for her baby. Tom nodded. "I'll be discreet. Give me a week." It only took 5 days. Marie met him at a roadside diner far from town. She wore a loose coat and sunglasses, though it was cloudy out. Tom slid a plain envelope across the table and didn't say anything at first. He just waited. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear. Rick stepping out of a sleek black car in front of a downtown luxury high-rise. A woman beside him, tall, brunette, sharply dressed, laughing as she linked her arm through his. Another photo showed them entering the building together well past 10 p.m. Then again the next night, and the one after. "Her name's Dana Whitmore," Tom said, voice low. "Corporate consultant, known for helping with mergers and cleaning up PR disasters. Single, no kids, lot of rumors about how she builds trust with high-profile clients." Marie felt sick. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Are they?" Tom shrugged, compassionate but honest. "Can't say for sure. No kissing, no bedroom shots, but they're close. And it's always late, if it walks like a duck." Marie nodded slowly, the silence between them thick as syrup. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she returned home to find Rick in the living room, sipping a glass of scotch by the fireplace. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his eyes weary. "Hey," he said. "You're home late." "I went to see Karen," she replied calmly. He nodded, unconcerned. "How is she?" Marie pulled the envelope from her coat pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a soft thud, but the sound felt thunderous in the quiet room. Rick froze. "What's this?" "Pictures," she said, "of you and Dana." His hand hovered over the envelope but didn't touch it. His face shifted, first confusion, then something colder. He didn't deny it. "Not really." "She's helping me with the European deal," he said. "You have no idea how complicated this is." "You're right," Marie replied, voice steady. "I have no idea why a married man needs to visit a consultant after midnight 3 nights in a row." "It's not what you think," he said quickly, standing now, defensive. It's emotional support. I didn't. There was no affair. Marie laughed, sharp and humorless. Do you think that makes it better? That you were emotionally intimate with another woman while I carried your child? I didn't want to burden you. And yet, here we are. Rick sighed, raking a hand through his hair. I messed up. But don't let this spiral, please. For the baby. Marie looked at him, really looked at him. The man she once trusted, the father of her unborn child, the one who promised her forever. I'm not spiraling, she said quietly. I'm waking up. Then she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Rick staring into the flickering shadows of his perfect, unraveling life. The snow had begun to fall gently over the hills of Connecticut, blanketing the Callaway estate in a deceptive stillness. But inside, the tension simmered with a quiet fury. Marie had stopped asking Rick where he was going or when he'd be home. The pleasantries were gone. No more polite nods at breakfast. No more small talk about baby names or nursery colors. Their life had split into two lanes, his and hers, intersecting only at the crossroads of obligation. Marie spent her mornings pacing the nursery, her fingers brushing over folded onesies and unopened books about newborn sleep cycles. But her mind wasn't on lullabies anymore. It was on strategy, on survival. She'd spent years believing that love could conquer all. Now, she understood something far more important. Love could be used as a weapon too, especially when wielded by someone with more power and less conscience. That's when she called Janine Keller. Karen had insisted on her. She's tough as nails, Marie. Doesn't flinch when billionaires try to scare her. And she doesn't lose. They met in Janine's law office in Midtown, the kind of place where every piece of furniture was dark wood and every second counted. Janine, tall with steel-gray eyes and a voice like fine gravel, didn't waste time with niceties. Tell me everything, she said, flipping open a legal pad. And Marie did. The secret meetings, the photos, the lies, the ache of watching her marriage dissolve like sugar in hot tea. Janine didn't interrupt once. When Marie finally finished, voice cracking under the weight of it, the lawyer leaned back in her chair and simply said, "We'll start with a postnuptial agreement." Marie blinked. Not divorce? Janine gave a tight smile. Not yet. A postnup forces him to show his cards. If he thinks there's still a chance, he'll agree. If he's already gone, he'll push back. And then we hit hard. The document was drafted within a week. It outlined clear terms: primary custody of the baby, full access to financial records, a legal guarantee of child support, and a substantial settlement if infidelity was proven or the marriage dissolved within a year. It was more than protection. It was a message. I'm not going to be your victim. Rick received the paperwork with visible annoyance, though he tried to mask it behind a glass of whiskey and a tired smirk. You're serious about this? He asked one evening as they stood in the grand drawing room, Marie carefully folding baby clothes in a wicker basket. I am, she said without looking up. I've already said I'm sorry. And I've already said that's not enough. He ran a hand over his face. This kind of thing, it's messy. The media could get involved. My father's board will panic. Dana is a consultant for $1 billion deal. If this goes public, it won't, Marie cut in. As long as you're honest, transparent, and cooperative. Rick's jaw tightened. You're threatening me. I'm protecting my child. The next day, the power dynamic shifted again. Rick brought Dana to a private negotiation meeting Janine had arranged in a discreet dining room in the city. Marie wasn't surprised, just quietly furious. Dana, dressed in sharp charcoal gray and red lipstick, offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm here in an advisory role, she said smoothly, sliding into the seat beside Rick. Janine didn't blink. Then advise from the hallway. This is a meeting between spouses and their legal counsel, not mistresses. Dana's smile faltered. Rick reached to smooth the moment, but Marie's glare froze him in place. Let her stay, Marie said coolly. Let her hear exactly what you're risking. The discussion was civil, but the tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. Marie laid out her terms. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She was calm, clear, and cutting. Rick fidgeted, avoided her eyes. When he did speak, it was to mumble something about doing what's best for the company and keeping the merger on track. Janine leaned in, tone as cold as the winter wind. If your client wants discretion, he'd do well to sign the agreement. If not, we'll file, go public, and subpoena every text heath since last June. Rick sat back, stunned. Dana whispered something to him, but Marie didn't care. She was done watching from the sidelines. Outside, as the snow thickened on the streets, Marie and Janine stepped into the cold, their coats wrapped tight. "He won't fight clean," Janine warned. "Not if Dana has influence." Marie looked up at the gray sky. "Then I'll fight smarter." The war had officially begun, and she was no longer afraid. The chill in the air no longer came from the December wind. It had seeped into the walls of the Calloway estate, settling into every room like an unwelcome guest. Rick had moved into the guest suite at the far end of the manor, citing Marie's need for space, but Marie knew better. They were no longer a couple. They were opposing forces orbiting around a child not yet born. Each morning began with strained silence over breakfast. Marie's hand would cradle her growing belly as Rick sat across from her, eyes hollow, fingers tapping distractedly on the table. The only words exchanged were perfunctory, like strangers trapped in a shared routine. The staff whispered in hallways, and Mrs. Aldridge, their longtime housekeeper, left notes of quiet support under Marie's teacup. "Take care of yourself. The baby needs your strength." But nothing could prepare her for what came next. It started with a whisper in the press, a blind item on a gossip blog. East Coast Mogul's marriage crumbling, as rumors swirl of an affair with a well-known consultant, a fortune, and a baby hang in the balance. No names, but everyone who mattered could guess. Within days, the tabloids had their headlines. Photos of Rick and Dana, exiting luxury hotels, attending business events, side by side like royalty. The media painted Dana as Rick's mysterious confidant and Marie as the forgotten wife. Marie didn't flinch. She gathered the articles and handed them to Janine, who read them with barely veiled contempt. "It's starting," Janine said, sliding the folder shut. "This is how they build narrative. Paint you as irrelevant before you ever speak." Rick's response was swift and ruthless. He replaced his previous legal team with Carter Mason, a hard-nosed attorney known for smear campaigns and courtroom theatrics. Dana's suggestion, no doubt. At their first hearing, Carter strolled into court like a wolf in a tailored suit, his voice booming and smug as he attempted to paint Marie as unstable, overly emotional, and using pregnancy as leverage. Marie sat frozen, her pulse pounding. Rick wouldn't even meet her eyes. Janine rose like a storm. "Your Honor, these accusations are speculative and offensive. Mrs. Calloway is an expecting mother, not a bargaining chip." The judge, visibly irritated by Carter's grandstanding, granted Marie's request for a sealed proceeding. But the damage had been done. This wasn't going to be a negotiation. This was war. Outside the courtroom, Carter brushed past them, smirking. "We're just getting started, Mrs. Calloway," he said. "I hope your record is clean." Marie stared at him, disbelief morphing into fury. "You have no idea who I am." That night, Rick called. "I never wanted it to get this far," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Can we talk?" Marie hesitated. "About what?" "Therapy. Us. I know I've messed up, but I don't want to lose you. Or our baby." She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. They met in a discreet therapist's office in Midtown. Dr. Penelope Morales, a calm woman with silver hair and patient eyes. She opened the session with gentle questions, and for the first time in weeks, Rick tried to explain. "I wasn't thinking," he admitted. "Dana was there when things at the company were spiraling. She listened. She helped me stay sane." Marie sat stiffly beside him, arms crossed. "So instead of talking to your wife, the one carrying your child, you chose a woman with a Chanel briefcase and no moral compass." Rick flinched. "It wasn't an affair, not physically." "Oh," Marie said with a dry laugh. "That makes it fine then." Dr. Morales interjected, redirecting the conversation to the root of the disconnect. They talked. For a moment, it felt almost human again. Rick reached for Marie's hand. She let him hold it for a second. Then Dr. Morales asked, "Have you cut off your relationship with Dana?" Silence. Rick hesitated, just long enough for Marie to know the answer. "We're wrapping up business matters," he said finally, avoiding her gaze. Marie pulled her hand away. "Then we're done here." Later that evening, her phone buzzed with a message from Karen. A screenshot. Another tabloid headline. Another photo. Rick and Dana, again emerging from a private club, his hand hovering on the small of her back. Marie stood in the nursery, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching the phone. The mobile spun in her palm as if it might burn her. The world tilted, but the baby kicked, reminding her of what mattered. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about pride or pain or what might have been. It was about protecting her child from a legacy of lies. And she was just getting started. The morning she walked into Callaway Maritime's executive tower, the sky was the color of wet steel. Wind rushed between the skyscrapers, tugging at the hem of her coat, but Marie Callaway didn't flinch. She moved with quiet determination, her heels tapping a slow, measured rhythm against the marble floors of the building her husband once ruled like a king. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Whispers followed her as she passed, but she kept her eyes forward. Today wasn't about fear, it was about truth. She pushed open the glass doors to the boardroom and found Rick already seated at the far end of the long conference table. Dana Whitmore stood beside him, tablet in hand, wearing a tight smile and a navy sheath dress that screamed power. The boardroom was full. Executives in pressed suits, legal counsel on both sides, assistants pretending not to eavesdrop. Everyone went quiet when Marie entered, her pregnant belly prominent beneath a tailored cream coat. And then, with a grace that silenced even the skeptics, she placed a stack of neatly bound documents onto the table. "I'm filing for divorce," she said, voice steady and unshaken. "And I'm seeking primary custody of our child." A stunned silence swept the room. Rick rose abruptly, his chair screeching backward. "Marie, wait, don't do this here." She turned to him, eyes blazing. "When was I ever allowed to choose the time or place, Rick? You made your choices behind closed doors. Now I make mine out in the open." Dana shifted uncomfortably, exchanging anxious glances with the board members. This was the kind of scene she had spent her career avoiding, the raw, human fallout of ambition turned toxic. Rick tried to regain control. "We can talk about this privately. We can still fix things." "You had your chance," Marie replied, her voice softer now, but no less resolute. "Every time you said you were sorry and still went back to her, every late-night meeting, every lie, every compromise of our family's future, it led to this." She glanced at the documents. "My lawyer will be in touch. You'll find the terms clear. You won't be blindsided. That's not my style." Janine, seated beside her with calm authority, tapped the table. "We're also requesting immediate disclosure of all offshore assets, corporate interests, and consulting contracts involving Ms. Whitmore." Rick's jaw tightened. Dana looked away. As Marie turned to leave, Rick called out again, desperation finally cracking through his composure. "You don't have to do this. Think of the baby." She paused in the doorway. "I am." The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime, but the silence she left behind roared like a storm. In the weeks that followed, headlines exploded across digital news feeds. Callaway marriage implodes, wife files suit amid infidelity claims. Mogul's mistress tied to European merger scandal. Investors panicked. The long-hyped deal with the European conglomerate began to unravel as whispers of legal exposure spread. Dana, once poised to become the face of the merger, was quietly removed from press materials. Rick's name no longer reassured shareholders, it alarmed them. Meanwhile, Marie remained composed. With Janine by her side, she moved through court proceedings like a seasoned diplomat. She didn't ask for vengeance. She asked for stability, security, and safeguards for her child. Her demands were rational but firm. Full custody, equitable child support, and a legal clause barring Dana from any future involvement in decisions regarding their child's welfare. Rick, under pressure from collapsing investor confidence, reluctantly agreed. His attorneys filed no objection to the settlement. Perhaps he thought silence would buy him time to recover. But the public wasn't forgetting. Then came the final blow, a leaked video from a London hotel elevator, time-stamped 2 weeks after therapy began. In it, Rick and Dana were seen laughing, their bodies close, her hand brushing his shoulder. It wasn't salacious, but it didn't need to be. The intimacy was damning. The internet did the rest. Marie watched the video only once. Then she closed her laptop and folded the baby blanket she'd been knitting. It was over. On a clear spring morning, weeks after the final decree was signed, Marie gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace. The press had moved on by then. Rick was back at board meetings, trying to salvage what remained of his empire. Dana had taken a consulting job overseas. But Marie had found something far more valuable than revenge: peace. She stood at the window of her new home in Vermont, holding Grace close to her chest. The breeze smelled like pine and sunlight, and the baby's breath was soft against her skin. She whispered into her daughter's ear, "You'll never have to wonder if you were worth fighting for." And that was the beginning. Not of a marriage, not of a scandal, but of something far more sacred. A mother's vow, sealed not in ceremony, but in strength. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this emotional journey. Marie's story is not just one of heartbreak. It's a story of strength, of knowing your worth, and of standing firm when everything around you falls apart. In life, we often believe that love means sacrificing our voice, our boundaries, and our peace. But this story reminds us that true love, especially for ourselves and our children, means knowing when to walk away from betrayal and reclaim our power. We hope Marie's courage inspired you as much as it inspired us. Now, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop a comment and say hello. We read every single one. And if you want more powerful stories like this, tales that move your heart and awaken your spirit, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, take care of yourself and never forget, you are stronger than you know. She was sold into marriage to a ruthless billionaire to save her father's life. But what he said on their wedding night changed everything. As secrets unraveled and powerful enemies closed in, their fake marriage turned into something dangerously real. Passion, betrayal, a love neither expected. Will they survive the storm or lose everything, including each other? Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that keep your heart racing and your soul hooked. The rain that evening came down like a verdict, unforgiving, relentless, as if the sky itself mourned the life I was being forced to leave behind. I stood by the kitchen window of our crumbling farmhouse, the glass fogging with each breath, watching the driveway slowly flood with muddy water. My hands trembled against the ceramic mug I clutched, not from the cold, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I was 24, and already I had seen too much grief to believe in miracles. My mother had died of a stroke 3 years earlier, right at the kitchen table where I now stood. One moment she had been laughing at my clumsy attempt to make peach cobbler, and the next, her hand had gone limp around her teacup. Her absence left behind a silence so complete it drowned every corner of the house in sadness. My father, once a strong, sun-baked man with sawdust in his hair and laughter in his voice, was hollowed out by her death. Whatever spark he once had, he buried with her. Debt became our unwelcome guest. It showed up in the form of foreclosure notices, medical bills, and collection calls that never stopped, no matter how many times I unplugged the phone. Dad started drinking to quiet the noise in his head, but all it did was amplify the despair. By the time I was 23, he had pawned every heirloom we had left and still couldn't make a dent in the mountain of what we owed. I took on 2 jobs, waitressing at night and clerking at the grocery store in town during the day. It wasn't enough, not even close. So when Nathaniel Crane walked into our home, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than our entire house, I should have run. His presence felt out of place in our worn-down living room, the leather of his shoes untouched by mud, his expression unreadable, as his steel-gray eyes swept the peeling wallpaper, the sagging couch, and finally, me. He was only 28, but he carried himself like a man who had survived 3 lifetimes and come out sharper with each one. Power clung to him the way dust clung to everything else in that house. "I'm here to settle a debt," he said, placing a sleek envelope on the coffee table. My father didn't look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he reached for the envelope. When he opened it, the check inside glinted like a blade. I didn't ask how much. I didn't need to. I could see it in the way my father sagged with relief, as if the weight of the last 10 years had finally lifted from his shoulders. And I knew, in that instant, that I was no longer a daughter. I was payment. "Your Grace," Nathaniel said, turning his full attention to me, "you'll be my wife." It wasn't a question. It was a transaction. I could have screamed, I could have begged my father to call it off. But what would be the point? The look in his eyes told me everything. He had already made peace with what he had done. The man who had once carried me on his shoulders and promised I could be anything I wanted was now selling me off like a possession. And I was too exhausted, too numb to fight. The wedding came fast. Nathaniel wasn't interested in flowers or music or dresses. He arranged everything like a boardroom merger. A small ceremony on his estate in Jackson Hole. A priest flown in discreetly. No guests, no celebration. Just a vow, a ring that felt too heavy for my finger, and a kiss that never came. On the night of our wedding, I stood in the grand master bedroom of the Crane estate, surrounded by luxury so sterile it felt like a museum. Marble floors, high arched ceilings, firelight flickering across walls lined with oil paintings of people who looked like they'd never known hunger. I waited for him, my heart pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. My white silk gown clung to me like a shroud. He entered quietly, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He didn't smile. He didn't approach. "Sleep," he said, his voice flat. "Your time will come." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me in a room that felt colder than any winter night. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my breath shaking, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Was this the beginning of something, or the end of everything I'd ever hoped for? I didn't know. All I knew was that I belonged to him now. And Nathaniel Crane didn't buy things he didn't intend to control. The days after the wedding passed in a kind of waking dream, quiet, controlled, and strangely suffocating. Nathaniel's estate was a masterpiece of architecture, perched high on a ridge in Jackson Hole, where the mountains stood like silent sentinels and the snow seemed to fall more delicately than anywhere else. The house itself was a cathedral of marble and glass, flooded with natural light during the day and cloaked in golden firelight at night. It was breathtaking, and it felt nothing like home. I wandered its halls like a ghost. Each room was curated to perfection, polished floors, oil paintings in ornate frames, furniture too elegant to touch. But beneath that beauty was a terrible silence, a stillness so complete that it pressed against my ears like water. The staff moved like shadows, efficient and silent, offering polite smiles that never reached their eyes. No one addressed me as Grace. It was always Mrs. Crane, spoken with a formality that made my skin itch. Nathaniel, for his part, was an enigma. He was rarely home, and when he was, he kept to himself. He had a study at the end of a long hallway, always locked, and a routine that never faltered. Early morning departures, late night returns. Occasionally I would hear his footsteps outside my bedroom door, pausing for just a moment before continuing down the hall. I never knew whether to feel comforted or watched. At dinner, we sat at opposite ends of a table so long it may as well have been two different zip codes. Silverware clinked, wine was poured, food was exquisite and tasteless. We didn't speak unless he asked something mundane. If I needed anything, how the house felt to me, what books I liked. But even those questions were delivered without warmth, as if recited from a script. He never commented on my answers. He never looked me in the eye for longer than a second or two. I learned quickly that there were unspoken rules in Nathaniel's world. Rooms I wasn't meant to enter. Doors I wasn't to open. Questions I wasn't supposed to ask. And I followed them, not out of fear exactly, but out of instinct. There was something in his stillness, his precision, that hinted at danger, not physical, but emotional, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff where the wind might decide, without warning, to push you. The only person in that house who treated me like flesh and blood was Mrs. Dalloway, the head housekeeper. She was in her mid-60s, with snow-white hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes like polished slate, cool but not unkind. She found me one afternoon sitting in the greenhouse behind the estate, among orchids and succulents and little trees trimmed into perfect domes. I had gone there to breathe, to pretend for a moment that I was somewhere else, someone else. "You don't belong in a place like this," she said, without preamble. I looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" She set down the tray she was carrying, tea for two, and sat across from me. "That's not an insult, darling. It's just an observation. People like Mr. Crane, they build their homes out of ice and granite. People like you plant flowers in the cracks." Her voice was rough but warm, like she'd seen too many winters to care about polishing her words. She poured me a cup of tea and didn't ask whether I wanted it. "He doesn't mean to be cruel," she said after a while, stirring her own cup. but he's forgotten how not to be. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to explain the ache that had taken root in my chest. The ache of being invisible, of being spoken to in polite tones and hushed voices, like a stranger visiting a museum exhibit labeled "Bride, Do Not Touch." That evening, when I returned to the house, something felt different. I didn't see Nathaniel, but I sensed him. His presence hung in the air, heavy and electric. When I passed the door to his study, I thought I heard movement inside, a soft rustle, a low murmur of a phone call, but I kept walking. Later that night, as I stood brushing my hair in the mirror, there was a quiet knock at the door. I opened it to find Nathaniel standing there, dressed in black slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, the top button undone. He looked different. Less like the calculating man who had bought my future, and more like someone who had lost something important and wasn't sure where to look for it. "I heard you spoke with Mrs. Dalloway today," he said, his voice low. I swallowed, unsure whether to admit it. "Yes." He stepped closer, slowly, the distance between us collapsing until I could feel the heat of him. "She mentioned your innocence?" he murmured, his eyes searching mine. My stomach clenched. "That's none of your concern." "It is," he said, his tone sharp, sudden. "You're my wife." He reached out, his hands gripping my arms, not hard but firm enough to make my breath hitch. "Tell me," he said, his eyes dark and intense. "Are you afraid of me?" I held his gaze, even though every instinct told me to look away. "No." Something shifted in his expression. For the first time, I saw emotion flash behind those gray eyes. Not anger, not cruelty, but something that looked dangerously like regret. He released me, exhaling as if something heavy had cracked inside his chest. "You shouldn't trust me," he said, almost to himself. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me breathless, confused, and more alone than ever. But not empty. No, not anymore. Something had changed between us. And I wasn't sure if that scared me or thrilled me. It happened the way most things with Nathaniel did, quietly, unexpectedly, and without warning. One moment I was a shadow in his hallways, a ghost at his dinner table, and the next he kissed me like a man possessed. Not out of love, at least not the kind anyone would write songs about. It was hunger. Confusion. A need, maybe, to feel something real for once in his exquisitely ordered life. But whatever it was, it set a fire beneath the frost. That kiss didn't start in the library or under candlelight. It happened in the hallway, outside the parlor, just after dinner. I had said something about the storm rolling in, something mundane. He had paused, staring at me for a beat too long, his lips parted like he meant to speak but couldn't find the words. And then he stepped forward, tilted my chin, and pressed his mouth to mine. No hesitation, no softness, just heat. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine for something. I don't know what. Permission? Regret? Maybe both. But before I could say anything, he muttered, "I'm sorry," and vanished down the corridor like the whole thing hadn't happened. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my world had tilted. I couldn't stop replaying it. The way his fingers trembled ever so slightly when they touched my jaw, the way he breathed like he was drowning. I'd expected control from him. But that kiss had been chaos. The next morning, he was gone again. Off to Denver or New York, or wherever billionaires disappear to when reality gets too close. I spent the day in the gardens trying to convince myself that it didn't mean anything, that it couldn't. He was my husband by law, not by love. And yet, something inside me was shifting, like roots stretching beneath frozen ground. When he returned 3 days later, he was different. He lingered longer in the rooms I occupied. He asked about the books I was reading. He even complimented the way I'd rearranged the sitting room. "It looks less like a tomb," he said, and while it wasn't exactly poetic, it made me laugh. That surprised him, and I swear for a second, his mouth almost curved into a smile. It was a strange dance, the way he began to reach for me in small, calculated ways. A hand on the small of my back as I passed through a doorway. Brushing a strand of hair from my face with a feather-light touch. At night, I'd find fresh roses placed on my nightstand, and once, a volume of poetry with a note tucked inside. "You said you liked Rilke." The gesture floored me. Not because of what it was, but because it meant he had listened. Still, the truth came to light, not with affection, but with a confession. We were sitting by the fireplace in his study, snow falling thick against the windows like cotton. The air smelled of cedarwood and something faintly sweet. Vanilla, maybe, or the scent of the whiskey he had poured for both of us. "I need to tell you something," he said, staring into the fire. I turned to him slowly, my pulse hitching. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "The marriage, it wasn't just about your father's debt. There's more." I didn't speak. I could feel it building, the twist in my stomach, the slow squeeze of something inevitable. "I had to marry," he continued, "and stay married for at least 1 year to receive full control of my family's holdings." I let the silence hang. It said more than my voice ever could. "I chose you because it was convenient," he admitted. "Because you had nothing, and because no one would question it." It wasn't just the truth that hurt, it was the cold efficiency of it. The way he picked me like someone chooses a suit from a rack. No emotion, no guilt. I rose slowly from the chair. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, and I meant it, but my voice shook, and I didn't try to hide it. As I turned to leave, he stood too. "Grace." "What?" I snapped, spinning on my heel. "You want credit for being slightly more honest than most liars? You bought me, Nathaniel. You bought me, and you're telling me like it's a favor." He closed the distance in 2 strides. "Yes, I did," he said, and to my shock there was no anger in his voice, only something raw, frayed at the edges. "I did, and it was the worst mistake of my life." I didn't answer, I didn't trust myself to. His hand brushed my arm, tentative. I didn't expect to care. I looked up at him, feeling something inside me tear just a little. "And now?" He exhaled sharply. "Now I don't know how to stop." That night, I didn't sleep in my own room. He didn't make promises. I didn't ask for any. But when he kissed me again, it was slower this time, tender, like he was afraid I might vanish if he held too tightly. We moved together not like strangers in a contract, but like people who'd both been broken by the world in different ways, and somehow found a sliver of warmth in the wreckage. And as I lay in his arms afterward, the fire crackling softly beside us, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. Maybe I had stopped wanting to leave. Winter loosened its grip on Jackson Hole in slow, reluctant breaths. The snow melted in streaks, revealing patches of brittle earth and long-forgotten footprints. In the weeks following that night, the estate began to feel less like a mausoleum and more like a home, at least in the quiet corners where Nathaniel and I let down our guard. Mornings found us sharing coffee in the sunroom, and evenings were filled with books read aloud by the fire. The kind of simple intimacy that felt more precious than any diamond or estate. For the first time since arriving, I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond endurance, a life of choice, a life with him. But peace, in Nathaniel's world, was always borrowed time. It started with a phone call, tense, clipped, and laced with a kind of urgency that twisted his voice into something unrecognizable. I overheard only fragments from behind the study door. "No, not yet. Tell them I'll handle it. We're not exposed, not unless someone talks." That night, he didn't come to bed. The next morning, the distance returned. Not overtly. He was still there, still polite, still offering coffee with a half smile, but something had changed behind his eyes. He moved like a man bracing for an unseen wave. I waited for him to explain. I gave him time. But silence was a habit Nathaniel wore like a second skin, and it wasn't easily shed. Then came the envelope. Thick, cream-colored, sealed with a wax insignia I didn't recognize. It arrived by private courier and was addressed to both of us, Mr. and Mrs. Crane. Inside, an invitation to an exclusive gala in Monaco, hosted by a consortium of international investors, a celebration of wealth and legacy cloaked in tuxedos and whispered alliances. Nathaniel read it once, folded it in half, and said flatly, "We're going." I didn't ask why. I didn't have to. I saw it in the way he avoided my eyes, in the tension humming beneath his words. This wasn't a party. It was a battlefield. We arrived in Monaco 2 days later, stepping off the private jet into a world painted in gold. The Hôtel de Bellecour shimmered against the coastline, its balconies dripping with ivy and elegance. Our suite overlooked the harbor, where yachts the size of small countries bobbed gently in the twilight. Nathaniel looked the part of the mogul perfectly. Tailored tuxedo, polished smile, eyes that gave nothing away. I wore midnight blue, a gown that clung to me like a secret. When he saw me, something flickered in his gaze, something tender and almost painful. But he said nothing. The gala was a theater of power. Men with shark-like grins and women draped in silk traded promises behind champagne glasses. Nathaniel moved through the crowd with calculated charm, introducing me to people whose names I'd only seen in headlines. I played my role well, smiled when expected, laughed at the appropriate moments. But under the glittering chandeliers and hollow compliments, I felt the undercurrent. Something darker pulsed beneath this celebration. Every toast sounded like a warning. At one point, I saw him across the room, deep in conversation with a tall man in a gray suit. The man's posture was rigid, his expression controlled, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air, like two predators testing boundaries. I later learned his name was Victor Lacroix, a French magnate with a reputation for ruthless deals and untraceable power plays. When Nathaniel returned to my side, his hand at the small of my back was steady, but his jaw was tight. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Perfectly," he replied, too quickly. That night, on the balcony of our suite, the wind from the harbor whipped around us, tasting of salt and secrets. Nathaniel stood with his back to me, his shoulders drawn. "There's something I haven't told you," he said without turning. "Something that might change the way you see me." My heart beat slower. "Then tell me." He took a long breath. "This gala isn't just business. It's legacy. My family's fortune, my control of it depends on decisions made here tonight. There are people who don't want me to succeed. People who would rather see the Crane name buried than watch me carry it forward." I stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. "Why?" "Because I don't play by their rules." He turned then, meeting my eyes. "And because I married you." I blinked. "Me? You weren't their choice. They expected someone easier, someone born into this world. You were my mistake, according to them, my weakness." His hand found mine, his grip firm but gentle. "But you're the only thing that reminds me who I really am." The confession hung between us, soft as breath, heavy as stone. I didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. I had been pulled into something far larger than our marriage, into a war fought with contracts, glances, and rumors whispered over crystal flutes, and I was no longer just a pawn. That night, he kissed me again. But it wasn't possessive or desperate, it was grounding. A vow made not with words, but with the press of his lips and the way he held me afterward, as if letting go meant losing everything. Still, as we stood there wrapped in moonlight, I couldn't help but wonder, how much of him did I truly know? And how much of myself would I have to become to survive what came next? The illusion of calm didn't last long after we returned from Monaco. For a few days, Nathaniel seemed lighter, less guarded, more present. He touched my hand when we passed each other in the hall, kissed my temple in the morning before leaving for meetings. We even laughed together, once, over a crooked painting in the den that refused to stay straight, no matter how many times we fixed it. It felt like we had returned home, not just as husband and wife, but as something deeper. Two people who had stood on the same battlefield and chosen each other when it would have been easier not to. But the quiet was a smokescreen, and the fire was still burning. The first crack came in the form of a headline. Crane Empire under scrutiny. Anonymous sources allege hidden holdings, offshore accounts. It was printed in sharp black ink across the Sunday financial pages, nestled between bland market updates and political speculation. But to Nathaniel, it might as well have been written in blood. He read the article in silence, standing in the middle of the kitchen with the newspaper unfolded on the counter. I watched from the doorway, clutching a mug I hadn't yet touched. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable, except for the way his knuckles had turned white around the edge of the counter. "It started," he said softly. "What do they want?" "To break me," he replied, turning toward me. Completely. That afternoon, he gathered the staff in the main hall and dismissed most of them until further notice. The house turned quieter, more hollow than ever. Mrs. Dalloway stayed, of course. So did Nathaniel's assistant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Camille, who barely spoke unless absolutely necessary. They began operating like a miniature war council, the air thick with tension, strategy, and worst-case scenarios. Meanwhile, I watched Nathaniel unravel behind closed doors. Not all at once, not in a dramatic collapse, but in the slow, suffocating way that only a man used to being in control can fall apart. His office light stayed on well past midnight. Papers covered every surface, documents, ledgers, photographs. He barely ate. He barely slept. But the worst part wasn't his silence. It was the guilt. He started pushing me away. Not with words, but with absence. Skipped breakfast. Avoided my gaze. The man who had once held me like I was the only truth left in a world of deception now barely brushed my arm when we passed in the hall. I finally confronted him one evening. The storm outside had darkened the sky early, and thunder rolled through the mountains like a warning. He was sitting at his desk, staring down at a spread of open files. "You promised we were in this together," I said quietly from the doorway. His jaw tightened, and I meant it. Then stopped shutting me out. He looked up then, his eyes shadowed and full of something more than just exhaustion. "This isn't your burden, Grace. You didn't choose this life." I walked into the room, each step deliberate until I stood right in front of him. "No. But I chose you, and I'd choose you again, even now. So whatever this is, whatever you're fighting, you don't get to protect me by erasing me." For a long beat, he said nothing. Then he rose slowly, cupping my face in both hands. "You don't know what it's like," he whispered, "to wake up every day knowing everything you've built can vanish with one leak, one betrayal, one wrong move." My voice shook, but I kept my eyes on his. "Then let me help you make the right ones." That night, the war took a name. Victor Lacroix returned, this time not as a rival at a gala, but as a threat at our doorstep. He arrived with the kind of calm that only men born into power could wear like cologne. Mrs. Dalloway showed him into the study with a hesitant frown. Nathaniel met him standing, his expression hard. "We need to talk," Victor said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then listen." I remained in the room, despite Victor's pointed glance in my direction. "She stays," Nathaniel said firmly. Victor didn't argue. He sat, crossed one leg over the other, and dropped the facade. "They know about the offshore accounts, and if you don't cooperate, cut ties, walk away quietly, they'll ruin you." Nathaniel's face didn't move. "If I refuse," Victor's smile was thin and sharp, "then they'll show you just how far they're willing to go." When he left, the house felt smaller, the air colder. Nathaniel sank into his chair, all strength bleeding from his posture. I knelt beside him and took his hand. "We fight," I said, gripping it tightly, "together." He didn't speak right away, just stared at me like I was some holy in a world gone rotten. "You're the only thing I'm not willing to lose." From that moment on, everything changed. We became co-conspirators, partners, warriors with the same war cry. We dug in. Him with his network of loyal investors, me with Mrs. Dalloway's quiet connections to people who knew far more than they should. Every step was careful, every move deliberate. And through it all, our bond sharpened. Not just in love, but in trust. He stopped keeping me at the edge. He let me in, all the way. Because this wasn't just about surviving scandal anymore. It was about surviving us. And that, above all, was worth every battle still to come. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. It means more than you know. Grace and Nathaniel's journey wasn't just about power, betrayal, or passion. It was about learning to fight for connection in a world that teaches us to protect ourselves at all costs. If there's one lesson to take from this story, it's this. Sometimes love isn't easy, gentle, or convenient. Sometimes it shows up in the middle of a storm, flawed, unexpected, and wrapped in chaos. But the strongest bonds are often forged in fire. When we let down our walls, even just a little, we open the door to something real, something lasting. Now I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. I truly enjoy hearing how far these stories reach. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story like this one. We have so much more coming, more love, more heartbreak, and always a little bit of hope. See you in the next one.